All right, so good afternoon, or good evening, I should say, actually. Greetings, my name is Ms. Galloway. I serve as the college advisor for Carnegie and DeBakey. And then today we're going to kind of be talking about I've applied, now what? I think a lot of students, I don't think they expect how many or kind of how tedious it is to kind of check up on all the applications that you're submitting, but there's definitely a process to ensure that they receive an admissions decision in a timely manner. So we're going to kind of navigate that. This is also the presentation that we gave to the juniors when they returned from Christmas break. We did it like the end of January, beginning of February. I've adjusted and added some things, but for the most part, this is the exact same slideshow that we presented to the seniors when they returned. So check your email. We tell students all the time, we know it sounds kind of repetitive and stuff like that. But oftentimes, like some of these students are applying to like 20 plus schools. And so that's a ton of emails to keep track of. And so it's important that they check their email often, consistently. Maybe if they just said a few days out of the week, 20 minutes to just go through and check everything. I also know some students, they prefer to have a separate email whenever they're applying for colleges. And so it really just depends on how the student operates. So that's helpful for them. Cool. I know some students prefer one email address. I do encourage them when they are applying for colleges to use a personal email, only because once they graduate from Carnegie, they will no longer have access to their school email. So usually that's what I recommend for them. But yes, it's really important that they check their email, because oftentimes when they're submitting college applications, they think that's it. And then, we just kind of wait and see, but there's actually like a ton of things that students have to do once they submit. And so I usually tell them pressing submit is literally just the first step. It's important that they check their admission status often. And so they'll get emails saying, that their application is incomplete. And so I usually tell students, each student does receive a login for their portal. And so it's really important that they keep track of that, because once they log in, it will actually tell them like, hey, we received your transcript on this day. However, we're still missing like SAT scores and stuff like that. So it's really important that they have some kind of system in place to keep track of all of their college logins, which is extremely important. And so when they log into their college portals, is honestly the best way for them to stay up to date on the status of their application. In the portal, they'll basically see what items were received, what items were processed. Also, it'll say like, hey, we're still missing these items before we can actually complete your application. Also, some students might see something called like holistic review in their portal. And so they may ask for extra documents. Maybe they may ask for a resume, an activities list. They also might ask for an additional letter of recommendation. And so students also need to say like, oh, was I a holistic review? Also, essentially their college portal will tell them whether they're accepted or they're denied. Sometimes it's the quickest way to see what response you're getting. This is mainly like your local Texas public schools, but it's the quickest way before they actually receive like an email of their admittance, or before they receive like something in the mail. And so the college portal is the key to everything. It will let them know whether the application is complete or is kind of still in limbo because they're missing some documents. And so essentially, how are students supposed to give them what they're asking for, which are these additional documents? And so for the most part, what's considered after they submit their college application, transcript is required, absolutely. Test scores, it really just depends on how the student applies. I do know next school year, most colleges are going back to wanting test scores. So I know some schools might do away with test optional. So it's their transcript and their test scores. The way that their transcript will be sent will be Naviance. And actually next year, we're more than likely moving towards school links. I've seen the trainings. I actually think it's pretty nice. It's a lot easier to navigate, but school links is very similar to Naviance. I think it's a little bit more like user-friendly, and it looks more current than Naviance does, if you're familiar with that. So it's really important also that they keep up with their Naviance and they're adding their schools. Sometimes when I sit down with students, they're like, yeah, the school's saying they still haven't received my transcript. And then we'll log into Naviance and the school's is not listed for the counselor to send their transcript. So these are pretty much like required for the most part. Essays, it's a maybe. For the most part, our students are going to be applying to highly selective schools. And so their essays will actually go with their college application, but also depending on the type of major they may be going for, that major may be requiring additional documents as well. That's why, again, it's really important that they're looking at their college portals to see what they're asking them for. And then these things are not always required. Letters of recommendation, thankfully, are done in Naviance. And so again, when students are listing their colleges in Naviance, the transcript, the letters of recommendation, and that stuff goes with it. And then test scores, students have to log into College Board. So sometimes students think that the counselors are responsible for setting their test scores, but actually the students have to go into College Board and select for their schools to receive their test scores. And so these are things that are really like considered. And so students like, I submitted it, that's it. It's like, not necessarily. There's some things that they still need, you know, to look over your application. And so again, these are some of the things they may be asking for. I've even seen, maybe not so much for college admissions, but for certain like scholarship programs or summer bridge programs, some of them are wanting students to be vaccinated. So that was kind of new, that was interesting. But for the most part, again, it's transcript, test scores. Some students may be eligible for fee waivers. And so that's something that might need to be sent separately. Usually the counselors do that, but the students would have to let us know. And then senior coursework, sometimes that's required, but that's usually always added into Naviance because it syncs with Common App. And then also for some of our students, if they're applying to highly selected schools, they're going to be asking for a mid-year report. And so the counselors are responsible for the mid-year report, but with the mid-year report, that's typically not ready until February. So some schools are going to be asking for that as well. But again, that's done all through Naviance or schoolings at that time. And then also some schools are kind of flexible. It's just a matter of asking, but if the mid-year report isn't going to be ready in time, sometimes they will take like a cycle report card as well. So a lot of students don't know that. And then luckily, some of these college portals are being a lot more, I guess, technologically friendly, because they'll even allow the student, depending on what they're asking for, what the document is, they'll allow students to just upload it. And I think, honestly, that's the most like quickest way for documents to get processed. So a lot of schools aren't really doing the mailing anymore, but excuse me, a lot of stuff they're just letting them upload it through the portal. So I think that's pretty convenient. And then also it's a matter that they must follow up with their college or their university. I usually tell students, they were like, well, they asked for this like a while ago and I've already sent it, but in the portal it's still saying that they haven't received it. And so that's just a matter of following up, whether that's by email or maybe that's just by giving them a call. I usually tell students sometimes the stuff kind of like sits in a cloud. And so sometimes they may not pull the documents until maybe they received everything. But again, that's just a matter of following up, whether they give them a call or they shoot them an email. For whatever reason, some students are scared to like pick up the phone and call. I mean, I personally prefer it because for one, you don't have to wait, you know, with email, you kind of get an answer like quick and fast. So I usually encourage students like, okay, well, let's just call them. And they're like, well, what do I say? And I'm like, well, what do you want to know? And they're like, well, I want to know if my transcript was processed. Well, there you go. And so it's just a matter of students making sure that they have like their college ID number on file so that whenever they call, this people who are on the phone know who they know how to recognize that student, pull up their file and stuff like that. So occasionally there will be instances where students do submit documents, but you know, a week or so might go by and it hasn't been processed. I usually let students know like, hey, you know, this stuff takes time to process. But again, you know, just give them a call. And then sometimes whenever you call them on the phone, they'll pull the document right then and there and say that it's been received or processed. So I tell them, don't be afraid to call, it's okay. And then typically after you submit your application, if you were accepted, you definitely want to apply for housing, especially if you know that's for sure where you're going. I really hate for students to pay for housing, like multiple housing deposits, and they're usually non-refundable. But we usually tell students, hey, like if you've been accepted somewhere, you know for sure that's where you want to go, you might want to go ahead and put down your deposit for housing, mainly because it's usually the first thing to go, especially if you're looking at a hall or an apartment that you really like. Usually housing is like the first thing to go. So once they kind of, sat down with their family, they've decided, what it is that they're going to do, definitely want to put down your deposit for housing. And then also, this will be in a later slide, but also orientation as well, because that can fill up. And sometimes orientation has an impact on you registering for classes. But we also made sure that students were aware of what the UT CAP program was. And this kind of has a lot of deadlines associated with it. But for the most part, when students are applying for housing, it's definitely first come, first serve. Also, these housing deposits are getting very expensive, like $350, $450. And so it's really important that students actually, sit down, look over their financial aid package. Once they know for sure what they want to do, they definitely want to go ahead and put down the deposit for housing. But also understand that some students are still waiting on certain decisions. And so, at that point, I totally understand if you pay for a deposit for one, you have a backup for another, totally understand that. But also in some instances, like if they are really pricey, It depends on the university because not all are super flexible, but some of them will waive the deposit. And so, or what they'll do is they'll defer it to their bill. And when financial aid pays out, it'll take care of it. So it's just a matter of asking. Some aren't as flexible, but I mean, there are some. And then also it's really important to secure housing because if your student is interested maybe in a certain STEM like engineering, sometimes most of these universities have something called like living learning communities. And so they're able to maybe be on the same floor as other students who are also pursuing engineering, and maybe they're also taking the same classes, maybe they're also doing tutoring together. And so, of course, you know, the saying goes like whenever you're around like-minded people, you guys build good habits and stuff like that. And so usually like those living learning communities are the first to go as well. And then first year experience programs as well. Those are all beneficial for freshman students. So it's really important, you know, once you guys sit down with your student, you guys know where you're going to go. To apply for housing because it is first come, first serve. And then also these really big, like larger universities, once the housing on campus is full, then students will have to seek housing at like the off-campus apartments. And no, they're not owned by the university, but they're for students who attend the university. So, excuse me, I know, I think my second year at UTSA, I decided to go off campus. It was a little cheaper, but I just tell students just bear in mind that if you do move off campus, that is housing that's not owned by the university. And so you will have to figure out, okay, how am I going to pay rent month to month, et cetera, et cetera. Luckily, like whenever I had money left over for financial aid, I was smart and I paid up my rent for the semester, but also just ensuring that students know like the longer they wait is not a guarantee that they'll get housing on campus, and they may have to seek housing off campus. But luckily, like the university will run a shuttle. And so it's really convenient, but I had to make sure students were aware of that. And then really quickly, just want to talk about CAP. I usually tell students that, well, basically what CAP is if students are not necessarily unconditionally admitted to UT Austin, basically what they have to do is go to one of the other UT systems like UTSA, that's usually the first one to fill up, Arlington, Dallas. They go there for a year. As long as they adhere to their CAP agreement and their GPA, their sophomore year, they're guaranteed, you know, to transfer to UT Austin. And so I usually tell students, don't be too discouraged about that. This year, UT Austin received like 66,000 applications. And so just look at its crowd control. Unfortunately, not everyone can go at the same time. And then also you have to bear in mind that students in the state of Texas, if you're top 6%, you're automatically admitted. So I just told students, you know, don't be too discouraged, but I did let them know that if they're considering taking the CAP program, to make sure they read over the agreement. It's not binding. And so some students will do it just to kind of have a backup plan because they have other decisions coming through, but it's not binding. But typically UTSA is the first one to fill up. It's usually the first one to go. And so students, they definitely have to be online at a certain time when they're on there and pick their choice. I think they said UTSA went in like seconds last year. So we just kind of ensured that they understood with this minute what it was. And then also accepted or denied. So they're accepted. Really, ideally, what we encourage the students to do, really what they actually do need to do, is they need to make sure that they're being tracked in Naviance. For one, the scattergrams, this helps inform the juniors who are coming in next. And so if students, as they're receiving their acceptances or denials, you know, we just tell them, you know, I know it seems, I don't know, maybe shaming to put a denial, but it really does help the class that's coming behind them. And so we really do ideally want them to kind of update their Naviance as they go. So it's really important that they do that. Also, we ask them to update Naviance because at the end of the year, whenever they have to set where they're attending, like, okay, I'm committed to this school, this is where I'm going, that's how the counselors know where to send their final transcript. Because typically the college will need their final transcript pretty much saying that they graduated. It has Miss Maxie, the registrar's signature on it, and then it has like kind of like that state of Texas stamp of approval. So that's another reason why I really do need them to keep track. I tell them Naviance is their way of communicating with us without like actually communicating with us. And so sometimes whenever we're going through like the alpha split and we're looking at students and we see that a student doesn't have anything accepted or denied, then that's kind of warrants a conversation because it's like, hey, are they missing documents? Have you been checking your portals? Like, do we need to sit down? What do we need to do? And then if maybe we see a student who has like all denials, it's like, okay, like we need to maybe rethink our list and stuff like that. And so this is typically kind of like a snapshot of what it would look like. They have to go in, edit all this stuff, and then this is where they would put whether they are accepted or denied. And ideally, it would be nice for them to put the app type. Not only does that help with deadlines, but again, with the scattergrams. And then School Links, which is what we're supposed to be moving towards next year, does have the scattergram feature. I'm just curious to know how that's going to work if we don't technically have historical data on that app, but we're still going through the training and stuff like that, but I really like it. I'm excited for it. And then again, financial aid. I know we kind of talked about this a lot in other sessions, but what's really important is that once students have applied to college and maybe they're getting their acceptances, you know, there's a lot of like really big decisions that have to be made. And a lot of it is really based on financial aid, how much a school is giving your student. And so again, as of last year, the year before, this has been a graduation requirement. And so students satisfy it, you know, one of two ways. They either do the financial aid application or, you sit down with your parent and you do an opt-out form. Really, that's what it is about it. Currently, I think now we're like at 88% financial aid, which is really, 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 really good. I think the whole point behind this was, I think once students were saying, you know, they could potentially get money to go to school, that was the whole goal. So yes. And then receiving their financial aid award letter, that's kind of the season that we're in right now with the seniors. Again, they have to log into their portals. That is literally the best way to stay up to date on the status. And so in the portal, they will see kind of like a financial aid tab. And so it'll pretty much tell them like, hey, we're missing this. Also, students need to make sure that their school is not requiring the CSS profile. That's also really important. There's been a few students that are like, I haven't been awarded yet. And I'm like, you never did the CSS profile. So the longer it takes them to do some of these things, the longer it just takes for a financial aid package to be generated for them. And so also they need to ensure that all of the schools that they've applied and been accepted to have been added on their FAFSA, because there'll just be instances where they're like, I know Texas State is awarding, but I haven't received mine. So I'm like, okay, well, let's look into your FAFSA. And they never added them as a school. So that's another thing too. And then selected for verification, we're dealing with that right now. All verification is the school or FAFSA verifying that the information that you put in is accurate. That's all that is. And so students can be selected two ways. They're either selected by basically the Department of Ed. And if you're selected by them, basically means that something doesn't like look right. And so they want to flag it. And more than likely, if they flag it, the school will flag it. Now, if FAFSA didn't flag you for verification, schools by law, they're legally required to randomly select students for verification. So it's just a matter of submitting the documents. And all it is your 1040 form, a tax transcript. So the sooner students get that in, the sooner that their award can be aided. And so this is typically done like during February, May. So some students are starting to get packages in, which is good. And then other students are like, where is it? I'm like, well, they typically don't award till like March, like UH. They typically don't award till like till March, sorry. And so again, with verification, it's just a matter of submitting the documents. The sooner you do it, the sooner they can process your stuff, because it can take maybe 6 to 8 weeks. So they definitely want to make sure they're continuously checking their portals. And then also seniors are required, to report scholarships that they were awarded and grants. So I think it's on the next slide. Also, I typically tell the seniors, I'm like, well, I need to apply for scholarships. A lot of students don't know that maybe their college or their university has like a scholarship hub or a portal. And so I was sitting down with a student last week, and I was like, well, where are you thinking about going? And she was like, I'm thinking about going to UTSA. I was like, well, they have a whole scholarship hub. And so we looked at it, and it was literally like 9 pages of scholarships for UTSA students. And so I definitely want to encourage students to tap those resources too. I think with UT Austin, when the students submit their application and is being processed, it's typically a to-do list. Actually, for UT, one of the to-do items is the scholarship application. Sometimes students skip over that, but it's really important that they're doing that early. The earlier they're doing it, the likely they are to be considered for one. So class of 2022, they brought in 21 million. Very impressive, pretty good. But I think 23 can maybe get it up to 22, 23. I'm being a little competitive. And so it's really important. We tell them all the time, once you get stuff in, please make sure they send it. This is the form that we're using to report. And so they are getting it in, but again, it is kind of early. So I don't want students to feel kind of alarmed, or I don't want them to feel worried if they haven't received a package yet. It's still pretty early, but we try to kind of let them know to send them in as they get them, because it is a part of senior checkout and we don't want to hold them up with that. Also, another really big thing that students, and I think parents don't know about, is that if you get your financial aid package and it's not reflective of maybe you doing the net price calculator or something like that, students are entitled to appeal their financial aid. And so typically they call it a special circumstance appeal. For example, we did have a student, I think they applied ED to University of Boston, and she got a pretty, decent package, but there was still a huge gap that, her family would be expected to fill. And so, we sat down and we kind of had to identify, I don't want to say deficits, but we kind of had to identify gaps, to basically plead our case, because if a student does go through with an appeal, they will have to back up their claim with documents. So I just let students know, before we do this, what we're talking about, are we able to back it up essentially? And so this is typically, it's a letter, because some of them may ask for a letter once you process an appeal, but also students use this as a script as well. Like this student, I'm so proud of her. She advocated for herself. She definitely used this and she tweaked it, to her, ability. And she sat down and she had a Zoom call, I believe, with the financial aid person. And so I did let her know ahead of time, you are entitled to do this, but it's not always a guarantee, unfortunately. And sometimes if they do give more aid, it might be in the form of loans. But, she did it. She was able to secure more aid. It wasn't necessarily a full ride, but she did get more funding. And then, her family, they were going to be able to work with, whatever the balance was. So I thought that was really interesting. That was really good. But again, there has to be some kind of, there has to be some kind of lack somewhere. We've had one student, we really couldn't identify anything. And so they weren't willing to, edit hers. And, we were kind of prepared for that. But I usually tell students it doesn't hurt to ask. Essentially, closed mouths don't get fed. And the worst that they can say is no, essentially. But I usually encourage all students to do this if they're lacking somewhere. Another thing that'll really kind of help is if you did the net price calculator and you sat down with your parent, especially if you applied ED or ED2. And so you looked at that number, you're like, you know what, if you were to be accepted, we can do that. We can work with that. And then once you get your financial aid package, if that is not reflective of that, then you can definitely do that. And that's what that student did too. That helped her a lot. Also, and again, once students know where they're going to go, they need to confirm their acceptance. Most schools do require a deposit. And so they definitely need to do that. I know May 1st is usually the big decision day and stuff like that. And then they also need to register for freshman orientation. Typically at freshman orientation, you register for classes. And so if they want the best schedule possible and not left with the stuff nobody wants, like 7 a.m.s, they definitely want to register for freshman orientation sooner and as quick as they can, because of course those earlier dates do fill up the quickest. And then the hot scholarships, I usually send this out pretty often, and they are 2 months in advance. Oh, so yeah, we were telling about hot scholarships, and then they have to clear their transcripts. Basically, they have to make sure they don't have any NGs on their transcripts. Their transcripts are good to go, paying senior dues, and then just kind of adhering to their deadlines, making sure they're updating Naviance constantly with next year's schoolings, and they're just staying organized. And then that's all I have. 30 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, okay, I do see some questions.
Hi, Ms. Galloway. There's a question in the chat, and they're asking about EFC, expected family contribution. Could you please tell us what it is?
Oh, yes. So, and it sucks because they're definitely changing FAFSA next year, and it's not going to be EFC. It's going to be like SAI. And so I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but with the expected family contribution, basically all it means is it's a formula. It's not always a dollar amount, but based on basically the income, assets, maybe how many people are in your family, or maybe how many are already in college. That's kind of what they use to figure out how much your family is expected to pay or contribute. That's the EFC, that's what that is. And so basically, like I said, it's not always a dollar amount, it's a formula. And so what happens is whenever your FAFSA gets submitted to those 10 schools that you listed, the colleges, it's really up to them. It's up to the colleges to determine, okay, we can give them this, we can do this and stuff like that. Usually the higher your EFC, the more that they're going to expect you to contribute to your child's education.
So is this negotiable? Who do we, like, if we get this number, who do we go and discuss this with?
Yeah, so if you do happen to have like a higher EFC, I usually tell students to wait until they receive their package, wait till they receive that, and then see what it looks like first. And then if it doesn't look like a really good package, again, they can appeal. Because sometimes what happens is that for one, whenever you submit the FAFSA, you're using tax documents from like almost 2 years prior. So for this one, it was 2021 taxes for the 2023-2024 school year. And so oftentimes, maybe back then when you file taxes, it happens to some parents, like maybe then they were working, but maybe now they weren't. And so colleges do take stuff like that into consideration. Again, they may ask for, some kind of like documentation, but I mean, I have seen it happen for sure. But ultimately, yeah, that number, once the colleges see it, like, okay, we can do this, we can do that. And then also the lower the EFC, the more a student and their family is eligible for need-based aid, like the federal Pell Grant, SEOG, also maybe state aid if they did their FAFSA for January 15th. So like TPEG, Texas Grant, stuff like that. Oh yeah, that's a good question. So it shows like a number like 20,000, for example. It doesn't mean that you will pay 20,000. No, it won't. That's not what it means. Now, what some schools will do, I've seen it on Texas A&M's packages, because they've started releasing their financial aid packages to students. What I've been seeing on theirs is they'll put the EFC, they'll put the formula, but they'll put what that formula is translated into a dollar amount. They will do that. But no, usually the EFC is just like, it's a number, it's a formula. So I usually tell students, just make sure they look at their financial aid package. And then sometimes the college will translate, I should say. They'll translate that EFC formula to a dollar amount. But no, like once you submit your FAFSA, that's one way you can see it. When you submit your financial aid application, typically automatically a confirmation email is generated. It's like, congratulations, like you're one step closer to college, like you submit your FAFSA. If students scroll down, it'll say their EFC. But the way it looks on the confirmation email from FAFSA is just a formula. It's just a bunch of numbers. It's not a dollar amount. Yes, thank you.
So have you seen those EFCs being different? Like, would different colleges have different way of showing the EFC? So you're saying it's usually a formula, but can it just be a number, or can it just be like
yeah, sometimes
I don't know.
It'll just be a number. It'll say like EFC equals, and then like it's like usually 6 or 7 numbers. And usually like the bigger the number, typically that's the bigger the number, the more they're expecting you to contribute, for sure. Oh yes,
So will they work with us? Like if say they're basing on the tax number that's higher like 2 years ago, but now it's lower, will they work with us and look at the new numbers?
I have seen them. Yeah, most colleges are very flexible. Like they're willing to work with students. It's just a matter that you would have to show that, because I've seen it happen where they were working maybe when they filed then, but they're not working now, and so it's not a good reflection of their current situation. But they will work with that. I've had a student, they did an appeal, and so basically, they were expecting her family to contribute more. But they were able to, during her appeal, they were looking through her stuff. They were like, oh, actually, you took out a certain amount from your 401k. And of course, when you do that, that's taxable income. And so they were able to work with her on that. So it's just really a matter of them kind of, digging into what it is that's going on. And then they'll kind of make the determining factor whether they'll award more aid or not. I hope that kind of made sense. Mm-hmm. Also, I've seen like maybe there was a death of a family member. It would ideally have to be a parent, but I've seen that, like if that happened, and
Is there time limit that you have to accept those conditions or those numbers, or normally
financial aid packages?
Yeah.
Some schools do have deadlines. They'll say we need to know by this day whether or not you're going to be accepting your offer. So yes, they will let you know. And then some schools are a little bit more flexible. So if students, when they log into their portal, it'll say like accept or deny. They don't have like, maybe their grants on there, their scholarships and their loans, and they can say accept or they can say deny at that time. But I think Texas schools are a little bit more forgiving. Like essentially, if you just never say that you're going to accept or deny, then they're going to kind of take that as maybe like you're not going to be going here. But also some schools have very strict, like we need to know by this day whether or not you're going to be attending. And if you don't let them know, then of course your financial aid will kind of be void. Oh yeah, looking at those EFCs, I don't know really how they expect people to afford that, to be honest. College affordability right now is not ideal.
And the parental, I mean, that's just a recommendation based on numbers, but it's going on the assumption that parents are contributing. I mean, not everyone is. And so it's just a suggestion. Either way, your kids are going to have to go and, speak to the financial aid office and put together their package based on what they've been offered, whether it includes parental contribution or not. Your kids should know whether or not you're helping, and if you are, how much. And that should be part of the package that they go to their financial aid office and say, okay, I have a scholarship for $1,000. My parents are helping me this much. I saved up this much working over the summer, and this is the gap, and the school should be able to help them put that together. But just because the school says, hey, you're supposed to pay $80,000 a year or whatever, that doesn't mean that you sell your kidney. The school can say whatever they want. It's not true.
There was one student, she got into Northeastern, that was like her dream school. And she told me that with her package, they weren't giving her anything. They weren't giving her loans or anything like that. And it was just, it's like, how do you tell a student, I encouraged her to do an appeal anyway. And even with the appeal, they were kind of like, so some financial officers are just really like strict. They're like, no, we can't do this and stuff like that. So it's really, I don't know, sometimes it can be a little discouraging having these conversations because sometimes students will have to make up the difference in external scholarships. And some financial officers really are not very flexible at all.
So for out of state, can you really can you speak to out of state colleges? Do they always require a contribution from the parents, or is it not a requirement? Because I have a feeling they always need something from the family.
Yeah, so some packages I've seen, it's like, yeah, we're going to give you something, but there's still going to be like you're still going to have to they're still expecting parents to pitch in something. And so like one student, I think it was Trinity, Trinity kind of offered them like a pretty, decent package, and Trinity is not cheap, it's extremely expensive. And so they offered them a little bit, maybe like a third of the cost. And it seems nice because it's a big number and it's a big scholarship, but it's like, how am I supposed to come up with the rest? And so I've yet to see like a financial aid package where ultimately everything was covered. And if I have seen it, it might have been the student maybe had a zero EFC. But I even tell students who have zero EFCs, don't expect a full ride, because I've seen some students who have an EFC, on FAFSA, they're fully Pell eligible, but all the school is offering them is their Pell grant, especially if it's out of state, and that's it. And so yes, I've definitely, for out of state, they give something, but it's hardly ever enough to cover everything. I do have some good books. I'm going to put them in the chat. But I usually always tell students, because sometimes they, it's just a matter of asking. So appealing your financial aid package. And sometimes they will, for example, the student and her family, they were not expecting them to be like, oh, you took this certain amount out of your 401k. You know what? We might be able to do something, And so sometimes they're kind of doing digging that maybe you didn't think, would come up. One really good one, it's, I'm put in the chat, is who gets in and why. This one. This one that I'm about to put in, they have an actual like book, like a guide, and then they kind of have like a workbook that the student can actually like work on, like you guys as a family, which I think is really cool. Let's see, does anyone else have any questions? Maybe any concerns?
I missed most of the presentations. I apologize. I had some connection issues. I don't know if you mentioned this, but is there a number, like, you know how we say like your rental should not go over your like 1/3 of your income? Do you say anything like that to the kids, like to say, oh, you should not take on more than this much of your income, or your family should not be taking more than this much of family income as student loans? Is there a number?
Like when they're taking out loans or?
Yeah, is that like yeah,
Oh,
if they're taking a loan?
yes, I usually, so sometimes students are offered parent, I mean, yeah, they're offered parent plus loans. You know, the parent plus loans, that's you as the parent taking it out in your name. But also with these plus loans, they're absurd, crazy amounts. Like one student, I think they're offering her a parent plus loan. It was like $44,000. And you know, I tell students like, this is not Miss Galloway talking. This is CHANAE talking. I typically do not encourage students to take those loans because they're insane. And it's you, like you're the one who's taking it out for your student. I did have a student who, and again, it's sometimes really difficult having these conversations. I had a student, they got accepted to Penn State. That's their dream school. And again, they were not offering them anything. They offered them like small dollar loans, which isn't going to do much. And I mean, Penn State is not an expensive school if you're an in-state student, but for an out-of-state student, it is pretty pricey. And you know, they really were considering taking out all loans. And I was like, you know, hey, let's think about this for a second here. Really, ideally, I usually always encourage students, they really need to be applying for scholarships. And it's really, I know it can be a lot of work because I see it all the time. They're applying to tons of scholarships and they may not be getting them, or, you know, I know it's a lot of work. And also, you know, I try to have grace with some of the students because also they're still seniors and they're still taking pretty like rigorous like AP classes. And so some feel like they may not always have the time, but I'm always going to encourage them, you know, do scholarships first, you know, see what you can get because you just never know. Also encourage them to aim for the low dollar scholarships. It may seem like they won't make a big dent, but also the low dollar ones are the scholarships that students aren't necessarily going for. So sometimes they're kind of like overlooked. But imagine if you get like two $1,500 scholarships, that's $3,000. And so I always tell students apply for scholarships first. And then of course, you know, I always tell them, you know, sit down with your family and talk about, you know, I think, you know, sometimes depending on the student situation, sometimes students, you know, they may have to take out loans. I was definitely that student who had to take out student loans. I just tell students to borrow responsibly. For example, when I was in college at UTSA, like let's say, for example, for the semester, I was only missing like $2,000. That was my balance. That's all I had, for example. And so if they offered me like a $5,000 loan, I didn't know that you could only take a portion of that. So instead of taking the full 5,000, I could only take what I need. So maybe I would have not as much debt, like a manageable amount. But, you know, I usually tell students if, you know, if that's your last resort, just make sure you're going to borrow, you know, responsibly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I really don't want a student to have to take out, and that's just your first year, $44K in loans, you know, for your dream school. It's really, you know, it's a lot of pressure, but I wouldn't necessarily I always encourage them to do scholarships first.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much, Ms. Galloway. I apologize for some technical issues in the beginning.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
Yeah,
I
we
know
always
usually we kind of
seem
wait
to
for
have those.
Yeah, no, but I was having issues earlier too with my Wi-Fi. I was trying to connect my nephew to his little iPad and it wasn't working. So I thought maybe, I was like, I think it's me.
But I was so glad it let me connect. At least it let me start the meeting because it wouldn't start until I hit the start button. So I did that and then it just kicked me out. So it was a good timing.
Yeah, it's all good. No worries. No worries.
Yeah.
I
I'll
haven't.
make sure I watch the recording to see what we
If
talked
there's
about.
any if there's any junior parents on the phone, I did send out like a lot of scholarship opportunities that they can get as juniors, and then like some summer bridge opportunities if they need something to do in the summer.
Yeah, that's something we still need to talk about. And yeah, and I guess because we said I've applied to college, so I guess a lot of the non-12th grade parents were yeah, they maybe not have joined, but how were the meetings during February? Were they good? Were
They
they?
were good. They were literally, it was a packed house. We had
Yeah.
no choice but to go to the theater because it was so big. But
yeah, it was helpful to the kids, I guess. I hope.
yes, a lot of them kind of were not aware, like, oh, I actually was slated for verification. I have to submit all these documents. And then a lot of them did not know. I think after we spent one session talking about like appealing your financial aid award letter. So if you're getting it and it's not, we talked a lot about, you know, strategies for meeting with them and stuff like that. And I had a ton of sessions like following that, like, okay, like, can we sit down and talk about it? Like, what do I need to do? What should I say? Stuff like that. So it was extremely helpful, I think, for them. And then, you know, we kind of had a space for them to work on scholarships.
Yeah,
So
that's good. That's good. I hope this will be like a yearly, like every year they'll have that chance.
oh, sure. I think, you know, as long as I'm there, I'll make it happen because they really did like it.
Yeah, good.
They had their senior brunch on Wednesday for like all the students who did pay dues. And so the ones who hadn't, you know, paid their full dues yet, we just kind of did a workshop and we worked on stuff.
That's good. That's good.
No problem. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for putting this all together. And
Thank
yeah,
you, Ms. Galloway.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
guys. Y'all are
much.
always a pleasure to work with. Thank you.